Okay, so we're now live.
Okay.
Um, Today we're going to be talking about actually a Facebook post of yours where you talked about compromise and how we needed more of it. So I know we disagree on some things in politics.
hmm
So I figured we just start by laying out what our personal ideas are, for everyone to know what our political principles are and how those differ from each other on maybe some base levels. And then we can go on to talking about compromise from there.
Okay.
So I'll let you go ahead and start.
Oh, joy. Give me the mic first. Yay.
Well, I host, so you can talk first.
Okay. Um. Uh. Well. I'm high. I'm I'm mostly a social libertarian. Um. I'm not so much into economic libertarianism as like the neoliberal kind of way of thinking about economics, but I'm uh, I'm into social freedoms more than anything else. Um, that's mostly my political outlook. Um, I
So
don't particularly care about government intervention in markets or the free market or whatever, what have you. Mostly because I don't necessarily believe that the free market is the best solution to all things. It's a good solution for progress, but it's not, in my opinion, the best solution for everything. So I'm like, I believe in regulation in terms of like environmental regulation. I don't believe that necessarily the market puts value on, or at least puts sufficient value on things like environmental preservation. Um, but in terms of social freedoms, if in general, if there is a freedom that you as a person, not you as a business, but you as a person, want, I'm probably going to agree with you that you should have it.
okay,
Probably.
so you would be okay with things like freedom of speech. Think people should be able to say what they want to say.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
All the First Amendment protections and all the Title IX protections and all of those kinds of freedom of speech, freedom of the press, um, freedom of anything, really. Um,
so basically, your negative rights, as Locke portrayed negative rights as freedom of speech is a big one, but anything where it's a natural right of an
yeah,
individual.
yeah, yeah,
Big on those, not so big on economic freedoms per se, like capitalist markets that can just do whatever they want.
yeah.
I think
I believe that ultimately there's a sense of there's an amount of naivety that is in with the idea that the market will do what's best in the same way there is an amount of naivete in uh, anything will do what's best. I don't think that the market or the government or what have you will in themselves be the best solution for anything, and that ultimately it's there's some level of compromise between those that will approximate the best solution.
And so on that, I agree with you on personal liberties, and negative rights. I'm a big proponent of free markets and capitalism, personally, for me as well. That's just because I think as far as what we have and having to deal out resources, that free markets distribute those in the best possible manner. Now, with that, I think I'm not for total deregulation of markets per se, because I think some people lack the foresight to sustain our resources that we have, natural resources. But for the most part, I'm for less regulation rather than more.
Mm-hmm.
And I would assume you probably fall on left of center on the political compass.
Yeah. Mostly because I am the opposite of a social conservative. That in general, I would align more closely with libertarians than with the socialists, but just because I am the opposite of a social conservative, I am left of center.
Well, I mean, on the political compass, you're probably below the up and down line, so more libertarian than authoritarian, and then left rather than right due to
the social
things. Whereas I fall on the political compass actually probably lower than you do, on the libertarian authoritarian side, and then I'm more to the right of the left-right spectrum, which I find interesting because I'm all for personal liberties to almost no restrictions on personal liberties. But I think that kind of shows how the political compass maybe isn't that useful in terms of how we identify ourselves politically.
Yeah. I think ultimately I think there's a few issues which for every person are going to be the important issues, and regardless of how you categorize people or political parties in general, it's going to be that on a person by person basis, which determines, or at least ideally should be, determining who you vote for. There's a lot of collectivist, I'm just going to vote Republican or Democrat or what have you because I'm a member of the party kind of thinking, but at the same time, I think that's a way of getting out of making critical decisions for yourself. I think that's a way of offloading the work to the political party, not going and thinking for yourself, what am I for? What am I against? What is important to me as a person? Which, in general, I think is also pretty lacking in the populace, that amount of self-awareness of what I want and what I am for and what I am against in general.
Yeah, and especially here in the States, political parties, you you sign up, kind of sign up for a political party so that you even have a chance of determining who the candidate's going to be. And
Yeah.
then you're expected to kind of toe the party line once your party's decided who the candidate could be, even if you personally might think, well, this guy is totally
Mhm.
not who I want. And then you can't vote for the other side because the other side is just so against your ideals, that you've kind of accepted to be part of the party that you are part of, that you can't cross the political line, except if maybe it's really bad on your
Yeah.
side.
I'm just going to say something that's probably going to make 95% of America angry with me, and I'm going to say I voted for Jill Stein in the 2016 election. I did not vote for Hillary Clinton. I know I'm left-leaning, but I did not vote for Hillary Clinton, mostly on my particular issues with dynasties in politics. I don't believe that political dynasties are a good thing for politics, and I also don't believe that anyone, Trump included, could possibly do enough damage in 4 years to kill America dead. That if when 2020 comes around, I think that there's going to be a reckoning for Trump.
Probably going to say some things that are going to get a lot more of America angry with me. But no, I think there's good Trump and bad Trump. Some things I have to give him credit for are, in my personal opinion, good moves.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's some things that I think, why hasn't Trump's staff taken his Twitter account and just shut it down?
Yeah,
I know why Twitter hasn't shut down his Twitter account, and that's because that would help the president. No, that would help the president too much. It would make him more likable.
Oh, I'm even more cynical than that. I'm just thinking of the guy at Twitter who could make that decision and just goes, you know what? No, we're getting so many views because of what the president said on Twitter, and it gets our name out there, and name recognition is really important. It's going to do things to our stock price.
Comes down to the greedy capitalists, huh?
I'm sure there's somebody who cynically has gone in the back room and has gone, how much horrible stuff can we tolerate if it brings in additional views and additional eyes on the product? Like, how much bad press is too much bad press? Or is there really such a thing as there's no such thing as bad press, quote unquote?
Yeah, any press coverage is good coverage.
Yep. I'm certain there's at least somebody there in Twitter that has gone and thought that.
But just to make it clear, I voted for Johnson, Greg Johnson.
Okay.
Because I'm a libertarian, and well, I'm a registered libertarian, so.
Okay.
And yeah, never going to happen. But hey, my opinion is I'm allowed to complain about whoever gets into office because I didn't vote for them, but I meet my qualification that I did vote, so I have a right to complain. Because if you don't vote, you don't have a right to complain. Your vote is your voice in our country politically. It's how we the citizens exercise control. And
Mhm.
if we don't win, if you don't vote for a candidate that doesn't win, you are allowed to complain as much as you would like. Um, Even though I'm sure there are people out there who would love to take away our free speech and tell us what we can and cannot say, uh, but not going to happen from my side. I you can say whatever you want,
Mhm.
even if it hurts my feelings. Um, so, but yeah, you're right. There's this collective there's this collective idea that if you're part of a political party, you have to vote with that political party, kind of regardless of what happens.
Yeah,
And
yeah, and as a Democrat, I was not happy with the way the um, Democratic establishment treated Sanders, and between that and my predisposition against political dynasties, like I'm going to say that if the Democrats put up Joe Kennedy, I probably would not vote for Joe Kennedy. I know they had him do a response to the State of the Union recently, um, but I see political dynasties as one of the major threats to a democracy, in that once you get a trend of, oh, it's going to be a Bush or a Clinton, and you get, or a Kennedy, and you get these dynastic families into power, it really pushes out the ability to have new thought and different people in office, which I think is the lifeblood of a democracy.
yeah, no, definitely new ideas, new people is definitely important, and I think that it's very important that we have new faces we can have. I mean, that's one of the wonderful things about democracies. You can have, well, the hope and the ideal is that you have everyday people from life, come in and step up and take a turn and get their ideas out there so that we can, um, make a better world. Um,
Mhm.
and I think that here in the United States, it's become very, especially in the Democratic Party, I think is more political dynasty esque than the Republican Party. I mean, I know the Republican Party has their Bushes, but I mean, Roosevelt's, Kennedy's,
Yeah, yeah,
Clintons. They have a
yeah,
lot more of that going on the Democratic side than on the Republican side, I think.
yeah, and I think that's one of the failings of the Democratic Party. So,
But you have to compromise on that idea to say you're part of the Democratic Party, since they obviously like their dynasties.
yep. Or I just decide to vote in a state that not vote for Hillary Clinton in a state that Hillary Clinton lost by less than 10,000 votes. Oh well.
Everyone hates you now.
Yeah, that's why I was like, yeah, that the Trump people just aren't going to like me because I didn't vote for Trump. And but I mean, just saying you voted for Jill Stein in the 2016 elections is a little bit an offer to the rest of the Democratic Party too, because it's like, why didn't you vote for Clinton? I'm like, I just don't like her.
Well, have you heard of the liberalists movement? That's I guess Sargon of Akkad has decided to organize us liberals, just liberals in general,
Hmm.
for a political movement to kind of push back against progressives, adding another whole kind of not necessarily a dichotomy, but it's kind of like here in the United States, Republican Democrats. You have liberals and authoritarians. Now we have progressives and liberalists, or at least the start of the liberalists.
I mean, personally, I don't see my social liberalism as being very out of sync with social progressivism, but
How can you not?
okay, would you say you're closer to a social conservative or you're closer to a social progressive?
I am definitely closer to a conservative, just on the basis of, you know, basic liberties. I mean, freedom of
Okay.
speech, in my personal opinion, if we go by the negative rights, the
Hmm.
most important is freedom of speech. And progressives attack freedom of speech almost nonstop. If like for me, freedom of speech, top priority. Because if you can't speak in your society,
Hmm.
um, then you can't have a free society. You can't have a free society. You can't have a democratic government, because if you can't speak, you can't share those ideas. And progressives attack that almost non-stop. Like
See,
that.
I see the same threat from the social conservatives, though, in trying to legislate their own morality, often evangelical Christian morality. Um, and I guess I see that maybe as a bigger threat than.
Oh, I mean, I agree. Social conservatives are way too stifling, and attempting to force religion down all of our throats and their particular brand of religion, whatever that happens to be. Because you can have social conservatives that are that are Muslim,
Mhm.
and they try to shove Muslim idea, religion down everyone's throats when they're in power. Um, I'm against that as well. But I think your standard social conservative Christian um, knows the value of speech and the freedom of it, right? They're not going to say, well, you can't say certain things. They're going to say, you can say it all you want, but don't do A, B, C, and D. They're more looking for controlling what you can do in the privacy of your own home, which I think is a big issue. And I don't think that is good, but at least they're not trying to tell you what you can or cannot say. And I think speech is very important, because if you start controlling speech, then you're going to control thoughts.
Yeah.
It's very Orwellian to want to regulate speech, and everyone thinks Big Brother, monitoring when they think of 1984, but really the big thing in 1984 was the regulation of speech and changing how the people spoke, so they couldn't even think dissenting thoughts against the party and
Right.
against the government. And that just shows you how important free speech is. Because if a government's trying to regulate you on what you can do, but you can still speak freely in that society and associate with people, right? You can overthrow that government. But once your government has complete control over your speech, what you can and cannot say, and controls it to the point that it's to the point where they can control what you're thinking, it's much harder to push back against that.
Mm. I can see that.
So that's why I feel the progressives are more of a danger um, to our free society than the social conservatives.
So let's get into the down and dirty business of what you're considering progressives then, because I see a lot of things in progressive the progressive part of like the Democratic Party that I like in the way of mostly freedom to uh, be able to do things, or giving people more freedoms in terms of uh, giving gays and lesbians the freedom to marry, that kind of thing. So, what what elements of the progressive party, progressive elements, do you see specifically that you don't like?
Well, the whole gay and lesbian thing, I don't really care if they can marry or not. I mean, um, personal religious beliefs, I don't think should dictate our secular lives, because I think religiously, for my own religious beliefs, that it's immoral. But that's not going to say, well, you can't do it from a
Mm-hmm.
society point of view. But the guise that they use, the progressives use this guise of, well, this is for equality, this is for what's right, this is what's moral. And so, for instance, these progressives, especially in the LGBT community,
Mm-hmm.
they, well, I guess it's LGBTQ or whatever it is at this point. I don't know how many letters they're going to add on to that. But
There's about a dozen different variations of the
abbreviation.
abbreviation. Yeah.
So that community, right? They're pushing in Canada. They got it. That adding gender identity to protected classes, um, and gender expression and all that wonderful,
Mm-hmm.
fun stuff. They use that, and they say, well, you should, use our pronouns. And then they say you should be mindful of what you say, or who you platform, who you allow to speak, because it can cause people, it can hurt people, what they call
Mm-hmm.
microaggressions. And that microaggressions are equating to violence. And it's the same thing as saying, well, whatever I have to say, if you deem it as it hurt you, or it was offensive to you, that's the same
Mm-hmm.
as committing violence. And so they're escalating speech to the realm of violence. And that's very dangerous, because once you say it's violence, I mean, that's a crime. And
Mm-hmm.
then you've criminalized speech, and only certain types
Mm-hmm.
of speech. So now you're censoring what can be said and what can't be said. And then there's the end of free speech.
Right.
And that's just in the LGBT community. I mean, all of this is going around, all of the what intersectionality, all this intersectionality that you can be. I mean, your race can play into it, and so racist speech um, can be considered a microaggression, and then that's violence. So you can't say or think anything racist. Not that I'm saying racist people are awesome or anything like that, or I'm pro Nazism. Um, that's that's authoritarian and anti-liberal in any way shake it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm against that. I'm just my political beliefs is freedom is important. I think freedom of speech is the most important. And these individuals on the progressive side have, progressivism started off great, right? Let's get women the right to vote, equality, treatment for blacks and people of different races in this country, and segregation. Um, all those sort of things were good things about progressivism back 50 years ago. The progressivism that we have now is about more and more control. It's, we instead of wanting equality of opportunity, we want equality of outcome. We want women to be getting paid on average the same as men do. And gender pay gap is a great example of a progressive talking point. They're always pushing the gender pay gap, and it's a massive misuse of statistics. I love when people say statistics they say math is the purest of science, right? Well, like I always said, statistics seems like it's the child of mathematics and English, and words can just be twisted to mean whatever you want them to mean, almost. And so statistics is the twisting of numbers to make them mean almost whatever you want them to mean.
Yeah.
And the gender pay gap is a gross misuse of statistics. If you're just going to average all the salaries of full-time workers just along the axiom of gender, there are just straight up other explanations for the pay gap between the genders than women are being mistreated in this country. It's literally against the law to pay a woman a different wage for the same job. Just walk into a McDonald's, ask a guy that's working there at the counter that's taking your order how much he makes per hour, and ask the chick that's standing next to him how much she's making per hour. It's the same. Now, if that guy's bringing home more money than the chick, it's probably because he's working more hours. He's getting paid overtime. And that's a personal choice. That's a choice on the individual level. And it's if you look at it, men work more overtime than women. So, of course, there's going to be a pay gap. And not to mention, guys are more in STEM fields. There are more men in STEM field positions than there are women. STEM gets paid more. Well, people like to say, well, there's so many, we're not giving women enough STEM degrees. But you look at, there's more women graduating from college now than men. And what are they getting degrees in? Gender studies. If they do go into STEM, they're going into social science, which is the least paying field in STEM. And those are all explained by personal choices.
So many female education degrees. So many.
We
pay teachers crap, which is an entirely different conversation. But at the same time, teachers getting paid $35,000 a year isn't going to stack up against an engineer that's getting paid $100,000.
Exactly. And to say, there's 30% difference in pay, it just kind of, you would almost expect it to be bigger, just with how the genders, kind of sort themselves out as far as fields of interest. So, the only way you could get the gender pay gap to be erased is if you forced women to study in STEM fields, forced them to be engineers. So,
and conversely, you would have to force men into fields like education.
Exactly. And so we then eliminate, just freedom of choice to run your own life. And that's super authoritarian. I mean, at that point, you're going super anti-liberal. I mean, almost as much as freaking Nazis are, all because, well, we want the same outcome. We want to get rid of that pagan. Well, here's how you do it. You take away freedom of choice of your own education. No, we're not going to let you do gender studies. You're going to have to do mathematics. Oh, you don't like mathematics? Oh, well, get over it. Get good at multiplying. You hated it in high school. You're going to be doing it for the rest of your life. we see how fast, see how fast this, deals. Or the other option is to say, well, we're not going to value engineers as much, right? That's another way to do it, is we're going to just say, well, we're going to pay teachers more and engineers less.
Yep.
Then it's like, well, why not just pay everyone the same?
Yeah, and
a doctor, a nurse, teacher, an engineer, just whatever. Let's make it 50 grand, 50,000, a year. I mean,
that might actually solve some problems. That would probably also greatly reduce the number of people in skilled positions, but that could solve some problems.
But who's going to be? I mean,
who's going to want to become a doctor if you only make 50 grand a year as a doctor? Yeah, that's the obvious problem with that.
Yeah, or why are you going to be an engineer? Or even better, why are you going to be like an astrophysicist? Anything that requires you to go to higher education, even.
Well, ultimately, you'd end up only getting the people in those fields that actually love being in those fields, which is a positive, I guess, but you'd end up with just flat less people in those fields.
Yeah, and there's a high demand for engineers at the moment. We can't get enough engineers. There aren't enough engineers. So why do we want to make them less engineers?
Indeed. That is some. We shall hold this off for eventually until automation gets rid of most of the jobs anyway.
Exactly. But back to kind of our thing is that's what I have issues with progressives. It's not what they did 50 years ago. It's what they're doing now and what the outcome of what they want to do now and what they want. What they want might seem great, right? It has a very nice outside. Equality for everyone. I mean, equal pay for women. Who can't get behind that, right? And how about we not say mean things to people?
Right. I mean, there has to be a level of freedom to be able to say mean things to people in order to be able to have.
I mean, here's the thing, right? When they like to say, well, we have a right not to be offended, right from offense, right? Well, when you call someone like me or whoever, right, a Nazi, that's offensive. What gives you the right to offend me by saying I'm a Nazi? That's just the question back. You don't like what I'm saying. You want to call me a Nazi, or you want me to call me some hurtful, hateful person. I don't like that. That's not very nice. It's not very agreeable. So if you want the freedom from offense, better be checking your own speech because it might be offensive too.
Going back to something you said earlier, I'm guessing that your problem with protected classes is more about hate speech kind of legislation than it is about requiring people to be served equally.
Oh, I don't have any issues with people being served equally. Now, I don't think that merit-based um, things should have quotas for certain races or genders. I really believe in merit-based things, but I don't think people should be discriminated against in the sense that you have to eat here or you have to do this. At the same time, I don't believe in forced servitude where someone has a protected class and you're looking for a specialty service to
Mm,
celebrate that. So, an example is that the guy with the cake baker, and
mhm,
the gay couple that wanted the
mhm.
cake. I think he had every right to deny service
Okay.
based on that. I actually like some of the question artistic that his work is a form of expression. I thought that was an interesting argument that was made, and I hadn't really thought of it like that. But in some ways, it is an artistic talent that he has. He's professional cake for special occasions. It's a highly specialized service.
Mhm.
It's not like it's just the baker at your Walmart and you're ordering a cake there. And he's making a specialized cake um, that takes a good deal of time and skill and talent in order to make. And I think he has a right to say no to anyone for any reason and to deny service. Um, I mean, we are allowed to deny service for, other reasons, and I doubt anyone would say that he has to make a Nazi cake, for a white supremacist protest meeting, um, and that he should be forced to do that.
See, I'm actually gonna hit you back there and say that in possibly my most offensive thing I'm going to say tonight, we'll see, that I think he should. And I think that personally, it would be better if everyone was afforded, like absolutely everyone, was afforded the protections of being part of a protected class, quote unquote. Just get rid of the idea of a protected class. Just make discrimination against anyone for any reason illegal.
Okay.
Literally get rid of giving businesses the freedom to deny service. And that's because now this is going to sound weird to libertarians, but I see businesses as a separate category of thing than people, and that people have rights that businesses don't necessarily have. I am the anti-Citizens United, basically. I am going against the Supreme Court and saying that I do not believe businesses have rights in the same way that people have rights, and that businesses, as once you incorporate a cake making business, that business does not have, even if it's a single owner and one employee, it doesn't, as a business, it does not have a right to free speech that is at the same level as the right to free speech of a customer, and that the customer's right to free speech takes
So
precedence.
I'm going to take you on this, okay?
Okay.
Here's where I disagree with you on this. That is basically forced slavery. That's slavery.
I don't see how this is the same as owning people.
Well, it's you're not enslaving the person per se, because the person is still free to say whatever they like as an individual,
Mm-hmm.
but you are enslaving their labor. Um, their ability to produce. You're saying that its production is the right, the production of that individual is owned by the state or the populace as a whole. And so the individual doesn't matter in that instance.
The individual worker and the individual business does not matter. No, it's the customer trumps business.
And see, I this is where I think free markets get it awesome. Okay, because you're doing this because you don't want any discrimination, right? A business should not have the right to deny, because it can get a business into a position where they're denying service to gay and lesbian couples, right? Take the cake business, right? They don't like gay and lesbian people, or they don't agree with gay marriage.
But I mean, I would go so far as to give this protection to Nazis.
Yeah, no, I understand. You're doing this universally, right?
Yeah.
Which is better than the progressives, because the progressives just want this for their protected groups of people that they like, and everyone else can go jump off of the cliff and should be denied service on the general principle that we don't like you. Which I applaud you for at least being consistent. The issue is here, though, that at this point, you're taking away the rights of an individual.
What rights of an individual?
Well, I'm an individual worker, right? For, let's say, let's make this a little bit different. Say I'm a gun store owner, right? I can't deny any customer service.
Right.
Okay.
So outside of legally mandated requirements such as not selling guns to felons.
Yeah, not selling guns to felons. Making no mental illness, things like that, right?
Right.
And here's something gun owners do. Gun owners deny service a lot of times. And they do it sometimes just on gut instinct of, while this person might be able to pass a background check or whatever, right? I don't think they should have a gun. And they have the ability to deny service. I wonder how many times gun stores owners do this. And I mean, they're not discriminating on anything in particular, but they're denying service.
Right.
And how many times that they do this does it help prevent, horrible crimes from being committed, or at least delay them?
Yeah, and I can see the argument for having freedom to deny based on any reason you particularly want. But
and here's the thing. Here's the beauty of free markets, and this is where you're going to be like, well, free markets, right? In free market, you have the populace that it's not a one-way street. It isn't businesses take advantage of consumers, right? Consumers have the ability not to shop at certain places. They have the right to choose where they do business, right? So if you don't agree with a business's personal choice, don't shop there. Do some sort of alternative. There's plenty of ways to deal with this problem without it being governmentally done by the government. Plenty of ways.
Yeah, I would argue that allowing the market is a less efficient solution.
Well, I mean, just look at who was the basketball team owner. he makes a offhand comment um, that people don't like, and he loses. He's kicked out. He basically lost his business over what he said in his personal opinions. Um, so to say that the market doesn't work, whereas a subprime,
Yeah,
sub-efficient things, any system is going to have loss of efficiency.
right.
But to say that the free market can't handle situations like that um, is, I think, a little naive to say.
Okay.
It can. It might not. I mean, it requires a conscious effort from the populace, but
Right.
so it's anything in politics. It's going to require a conscious effort by its citizenry to change or to make things happen.
And to be
And
honest, I don't mind in general. The particular view about generalizing it doesn't come from any individual annoyance with businesses or with the market. It's more that if it seems like the only way to prevent the abuses of the market that existing um, existing legislation that creates protected classes serves for, and it's also the only way to make that kind of legislation apply to apply universally and apply to forward-looking issues. Um, so that's why I arrived there personally. To be honest, I don't mind the system that we have right now. Um, it works. I guess you could call me a centrist on that one. Uh, the way that we have uh, protected classes at the moment, because I think that some of those protected classes were at least necessary to right wrongs in the past, like the Equal Opportunity Lending Acts and such, um, which basically means that if you have a down payment, anybody can go to a lender and get a loan now, whereas that wasn't necessarily the way in the past, that you could be denied for a home loan for any reason or no reason. Not that I think if we repealed the Equal Opportunity Lending Acts that it would go back that way, but
well, I mean, I can agree. Maybe certain things needed to happen when they happened, uh, but as a society, we've moved past that. Especially in the realms of the free market, just because think about it, businesses care about one thing, and that's money. We
mm-hmm.
all know they're greedy corporations. They all want to line their pockets, which is with as much cash as they possibly can.
Right.
No one's denying this, but they're not some mega conspiracy to, put certain groups of people down while elevating other groups of people. If you have the cash in hand,
Mm-hmm.
they will pretty much give you whatever you want. The cake banker, though, is an interesting kind of exception to that because, I mean, you have a business that's basically one highly skilled individual with a staff of people to assist him in doing what he is skilled to do. And I
Right.
agree with the Supreme Court that he is his work can be defined as art, art you consume. But yes, art. It's beyond a simple cake at that point, and at that point, he doesn't care that you have money, because what artist truly cares about money? Um, I mean, they want to be able to survive, but they do their art because they love it. And so they kind of, I mean, in a way, if you saw, if some artist who was, not a Nazi, right, saw their work of art being used to propagate the Nazi agenda,
Mhm.
they'd probably be very offended by that and try to have it stripped away and taken from the Nazis so they can't use it like that. And I mean, who would really say, no, they have a right to your art? They have the right to your labor. Um, it's not a right. You don't have rights to other people's things, even if you are a business. I mean, even if they are doing it to make money, you don't have a right to it at that point. I agree with the Supreme Court on the whole art is not subject to the same types of rules as other businesses, because Supreme Court, well, we haven't don't have an official decision yet. It was very
Mhm.
interesting, the judge's comments, because they were talking about art, and how um, art could be, you wouldn't think art, the person who created the piece of art has, some say on what it can support and what it can be used for. Whereas for other businesses, they said, discrimination is discrimination, and you can't really, you know,
Mhm.
discriminate,
Mhm.
right? You can't deny service just because, they're
Right.
they're a gay and lesbian couple. But at the same time, they say, well, art might be a special protected form of production in that sense, which is, they were really kind of struggling on where to draw that line, because they felt there needed to be a line drawn of, there's some things you can and some things you can't. And I think that's what they're debating on, is that, where to draw that line.
Mhm.
So, but that kind of gets kind of to the point, is you have to make compromises to join a political movement. Um, like
Yep.
progressives, right? You have to be okay with supporting the group idea over the individual. And I
Mhm.
mean, how many feminists out there, because feminists like the whole equal pay and get rid of the pay gap thing, would be willing to totally change their career choices and their career paths to do mathematics or the hard sciences, um, and be forced to. And I mean, that's basically what they're advocating, or what they would have to advocate for, to get rid of the pay gap, without just saying, we're for getting rid of wages altogether and we're just going to level the whole playing field across everything.
Mhm.
Um, and even then, it's, some of these feminists make millions doing talks and things like that. How many of them would be willing to just take a flat, you get this much per year and no more, no matter how much work you do?
Mhm.
Um, I think a lot of people, have to make these compromises to join the political movements that they're a part of. They're advocating for these things, though they personally probably wouldn't want to see what they're advocating affect them.
Mhm.
So they're having to make a compromise between what they personally want,
Right.
for the movement that they're supporting. And I mean, should we compromise on that, or should we just get rid of political movements, or is there a way that we can compromise on that? Like, say, political movements have principles too, right? They have principles A, B, C, and D, and I might not agree with D,
Hmm.
or I might agree with principles A, B, C, and D, and just not agree on the particular way that they're going about advocating those principles. Should we compromise on our political principles, right? Like our core beliefs. Should
Hmm.
that be something that we should be willing to compromise for a movement or for some other political gain?
I think ultimately that is entirely dependent on the person and what the beliefs are and how important those beliefs are to the person. Because if I'm willing to I'm willing to compromise on some things. I mean, I'll compromise on market solutions to healthcare that we had a long discussion about one time, instead of just going Medicaid for all. Um, but I'm not necessarily willing to compromise on freedom of speech issues. So
Yeah, and I mean, at this point, I've kind of, with the political climate as it is, I mean, it's almost, you have to prioritize what your principles are. And I think that's what's really nice about the liberalist movement, is that they've really laid down a core set of beliefs that
mhm.
are all based kind of on individual freedom. And from the people who've, been assisting with this and, getting it up and going, they seem to be willing to compromise on other things, like anything that isn't their stated principles.
Mhm.
uh, they're willing to talk about. They're flexible. But you hit against one of those principles, and it's like, you know, stone wall.
Mhm.
Might as well be, running headlong into a stone wall because they're not budging. It's, we are going to have freedom of speech. If you want to compromise freedom of speech in any way, um, we're not going to support you. That's not something that they're for. And I think getting those, I think political movements would be a lot more refined, and people could really associate themselves if political movements, instead of being these grand ideas and these grand narratives of we want to do A, B, C, D, E, and F, got down to here's what we believe at our core, and we're not going to compromise on these things. And as long as you are okay with these things, we can discuss other things and come up with a good solution. And maybe we'll be able to give a little here, and you can take a little there, and we'll take a little here where we what we can do, but we can at least agree that we don't want to compromise this set of values or this set of principles. And I mean, like, what are the principles of the Democratic Party? Who knows?
Yeah, at this point, it's really in flux.
I mean, what's the principles of the Republican Party?
Support the orange one. That seems to be about all politics boils down to. It
Well,
not is whether at the current moment is what your opinion on Trump is.
well, I mean, the Democratic Party is we are anti everything Trump, and the Republican Party is we'll do whatever Trump says because he's the president and he's part of our party. Okay, where can you start discussing things on making compromises? If your political party is your only value, the only thing that we can tell as the American people is one side will do whatever Trump says, and the other side will do everything Trump
To be honest,
anti-Trump.
there's about 9 people in the Senate who will not vote party line, and that was rather specifically shown in the very short government shutdown that we had. That was not precisely party line. There were 4 Republicans, I think, who voted to shut down government, which is typically the Democratic thing, because they didn't want budget expansion, and including like who was it? McConnell, somebody big name who was up there. But there were also 5 Democrats who voted not to shut down the government, mostly because they didn't want to threaten their seats in red states. And I think
So
that's,
that was just political expediency.
yeah, mostly political expediency from them.
Well, at
So
least the Republicans, voted against party line on principle. We don't want to have we don't want to expand government spending. I mean, that's a principle, right? Limited government spending. The Democrats just, no, we have to go back to our constituents. We have to get votes this year, and they're not going to like it if we, vote to shut down the government.
Yeah.
That's not a principle-based reason to vote. That is, I want to survive.
Yeah. And I mean, there's not.
So I mean, once again, it's like where are the principles in these parties? There are none. And because there's no principles in the parties, how can you really have any real compromise? Because you don't know where the landmines are, right? Where the brick walls are that you can't get past. You need to know where the soft spots are so that we can make compromises.
Yeah. And I mean, to be honest, if I was a Democratic senator, I'd be willing to compromise on a border wall in return for DACA. But that's me. I don't know what the Democratic position is there.
Oh, I mean,
I don't know what the Republican position is there. Trump, I don't know what anybody's position is on that particular compromise.
Here's good Trump, right? This is where I dictate good Trump was his plan that he released, right? Because his plan basically doubled or tripled the amount of people that would be allowed under DACA to become citizens, right? And give them a pathway to citizens. And he asked for the things that he really cared about, right? What he really wants, which is a border wall, funding for a border wall, and get rid of the visa lottery program and replace it with a merit-based system, where we're just going to cherry pick who we want into this country based on if they're highly skilled, what they can offer to the United States, right? And he had Democratic leaders within hours of releasing this plan saying it was a racist plan that was going, to kick people out of the country, when he was giving them more than what they asked for DACA. Like, more than what they asked for. It wasn't, okay, I'll give you what you want. No, he's like, I'm such a nice guy, right? I'm so wanting to, not necessarily that he's a nice guy. I don't think, he's particularly a nice guy. That's how he portrayed himself. But I think it's, I want to cut a deal to get this border wall so bad that I'm going to take your offer that you sent to me, right? Which it was should have been, most people would have just taken that as an insult, right? Give us DACA, and spending, and we keep everything the same and you get nothing, right? That is not how you make a deal.
Yeah.
Um, that's not how you make compromises in politics. It's like the exact way to piss people off and not get anything you want, right? Um, he takes that insult, right? He brushes it off and says, "You know what? I'm going to give you. I think it's triple. I think it
Hmm.
was triple what they were asking for. I'm going to give you triple what you're asking for. I'm going to triple the number you gave me, and then I'm asking for what I want." Right? Not everything he wanted, right? Just the big things that he wants, right?
Hmm.
Here's what I really really want, and I'm willing to triple your offer to get it. And they come out and immediately say it's the most racist immigration plan ever to come out of Republican mouths, right? And it's like, you do realize that he tripled what you asked for, right? So tripling the number of people that get to become citizens, right, is racist. And he got you to say that. He got you to
Hmm.
say it on national television and broadcast it to everyone in the world. I mean, you're no longer like the Democratic Party has just proven at this point that they don't care what Trump says. If he said amnesty for all, open borders, everyone can come in, and we don't even care if you're terrorists. We'll let the terrorists come through too, just because we don't want to be Islamic phobic, right? And we're going to prioritize gays and lesbians with no education. Just go totally off base, right? Just jump ship. They'd say it's racist.
Yeah, which is weird.
It's just like,
I mean,
eh,
to be honest, because the agencies that would be involved with a border wall have weighed in and said a border wall isn't really what they particularly think would tamp down on any kind of illegal immigration. It's not what they would want to do with the funding. I don't care if Trump wants to build a border wall. He can have his whatever $50 billion boondoggle in the desert if he's willing to go with what I see as the ethical solution for DACA recipients. And to me, that's a win. I would be willing to pay the $50 billion for a border wall, or just increase funding for ICE $50 billion if that's what he wanted. I mean, it's spending, sure, which is going to get some Republicans up in arms, but I don't have a problem with spending more money.
well, I mean, yeah, it's like
Democrats shouldn't have a problem with spending more money.
they never have an issue with spending more money unless it's to the military or to a border wall, obviously,
And
because spending money is racist in those particular instances.
I mean, if it gets you something you want, I mean, that's the point of money and the point of negotiations.
It,
You
it,
spend money and political capital in order to get what you want. So I don't know where the priorities are with the Democratic Party that they're not
yeah.
willing to spend money in order to get what they want.
Well, that's the point. You don't know where their principles are. So how can you even consider saying I'm a Democrat when you don't even know what they stand for?
Yeah. And to be
That's
honest, with the election of Trump, I'm not really sure, besides for the immigration message, which is even now because he's willing to deal, then he's not even that strong on the immigration message. I don't even know what the Republicans' principles are because, I mean, Trump is not an evangelical Christian. Trump is not small government. He's willing to expand the government for the border wall and like by billions of dollars.
Oh, I mean that's the thing. I like I said, I don't really. I say this is good Trump on the basis that he played the political game well.
Yeah.
Whenever you can get your political opponents to say what they want is racist and keep asking for what they want, it's, it's just like a work of art almost, right? And human manipulation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it takes skill to do that, and you have to give the man his props. Um, you know, at that point. And I'm sure there's a bunch of people who can tell me the logical or the explanation that they give on why his proposal is racist, even though it's doubling or tripling the amount of people that DACA covers. Um, but seriously, is we have to realize that political parties have to compromise with each other.
Yeah.
They can't find common ground and compromise if they have no idea what your political principles are. I couldn't talk to Republicans right now in Congress because I have no idea where they stand on anything. I mean, sure, they say they stand on certain things, but then they go right ahead and disregard it with
Mm-hmm.
no problem whatsoever. Democrats are the same way right now. It's kind of like everything. All of American politics are focused on Trump at the moment. I mean, this is worse than when it was Obama. I mean,
Oh yeah.
and Obamacare. Like people point to Obamacare as just being anti-President Obama, right, for the Republicans.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, they were at least talking and saying, here's what we want. Here's what we're willing to give up. We don't like this bill, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that that really I mean, this is way worse. It's like instead of it would have been like if Obama had come around and said, you know what? I'll give you everything you want. What we want now is no individual mandates. We want open, buy insurance across state lines, and we want to everything that the Republicans asked for. And then he just goes in and can we get pre-existing conditions, taken care of, where they can't be discriminated based off of pre-existing conditions.
Mm-hmm.
And the Republicans going, no, we can't have that. That's anti-free, capitalistic health insurance policy right there. It'll destroy our country.
Yeah.
That I mean, that is the level of the Democratic Party right now. I mean, you could offer them everything they've ever wanted as far as social programs, cut military spending, by 75%, to pay for it all, and just let them take all the credit. But Trump says, I approve this. And they would just have to say no. Right? That's where we are at politically. They would have to say no because Trump gave his stamp of approval.
Yeah, I mean, I would just personally, as someone who likes generally what the Democrats do, I just want to see them actually get a position and explain that position and then hold that position and be willing to make compromises for that position. It's just the amount of we can't negotiate with Trump is like worse than the "we can't negotiate with terrorists" kind of thing. It's like, what?
Yeah, and that's where we are at. And I mean, and I think a lot of this, if I mean, I'm going to lay this back at the progressives' feet. I mean, where the Democratic Party got to is because progressives have taken it over, and they're not willing to compromise on things. I mean, you have groups like Antifa, right? Well, they are the alt left or the extreme left or whatever you want to call them. You don't have Democrats coming out and saying these people are awful and no one should, be for Antifa. They're a violent group that's causing riots and deplatforming people and, physically attacking people. And you don't have any sort of denouncing of them, right? Whereas if a white nationalist protest shows up, you are expected to just denounce them full-heartedly, like just straight up, they are the pits of hell. They're the worst individuals and the worst humanity can bring about. And that's if it's a peaceful protest. That's a peaceful white nationalist protest where there's no violence and nothing happened, right? That's your default, what your default response should be, is they're awful. And if they're violent, it goes beyond that, right? I mean, heads need to roll type deal. But Antifa can literally go in, cause riots, and physically attack people, and there isn't anything said. It's like, okay, Antifa showed up. That was it. Antifa showed up to protest white nationalists. And some of them aren't even white nationalists. This is the great part. Like Ben Shapiro is a Jew. He is like number one on the Nazi, American Nazis hit list as far as hate mail goes, right? Where he receives hate mail. Like, and this is an independent study. This isn't him saying he's at the top. No, this was an independent study on, hate speech in the United States from Nazis, right? And he's number one on their list. Antifa shows up to protest him as a white nationalist Nazi. Okay? They don't even make sense who they're protesting half the time, right? Like, they don't even know. I mean, he's like super anti-Nazi, Ben Shapiro is, and you know what? They protest him as a Nazi. Like, literally show up and try to shut his talks on college campuses down. Why? And why does it get no coverage? Right? Like, why aren't these people like, you're causing violence and no one talks about it? Whereas a white nationalist just shows up somewhere, right? And when there's Antifa and white nationalists, there's always violence. And I mean, unless you are there, you really don't know who starts the violence, right? But it's always just assumed that it's white nationalists starting the violence. And I mean, there's some convincing video evidence that might state otherwise on who starts the violence. So, I mean, I'm not going to say Antifa's always starting the violence, and white nationalists and Nazis are peaceful protesters. I mean,
Mhm.
that's just being dumb. No, both sides get violent, but for Trump to have said with the whole Charlottesville thing, both sides are at fault for the violence, right? There's bad people on both sides of that crowd. There are bad people on both sides of that crowd in Charlottesville. Just saying, the man was not wrong when he said there were bad people on both sides. Now, here's where I get down to it, right?
Mhm.
From the media perspective, well, one side that had bad people, our side, we don't want to give them bad coverage. So, President Trump, you're wrong. You're supposed to only focus on white nationalists. This is how this country works. Nazis are bad. Anyone who's against Nazis by default has to be good, no matter what they're doing. I mean, people who commit violence are wrong. It's protest, but it's not violent protest that gets you places. I mean, I guess American Revolution was violent protest, but
Yep.
whatever. If you have enough violent protest, it gets you places. But
The Boston
it
Tea Party was violent, at least against
yes,
property.
yes, but at the same time, I mean, you do have British troops, killing citizens over stuff. So, I mean, once again, violence on both sides, but still, we don't like violence. Violence doesn't lead to stable communities. And
Mhm.
to denounce violence on protests, right? Like, imagine if this was reversed, right? It's Black Lives Matter is protesting something, right? And they have a permit, they have everything, right? It's just their standard protest stuff, not like the ransacking of stuff, not like the Black Lives Matters where buildings burn, right? Just a peaceful Black Lives Matter protest, right? And white nationalists show up. And there's some confusion on who threw the first punch, right? But at the end of the day, Black Lives Matter killed somebody, right? And the white nationalists didn't kill anybody. The white nationalists would have gotten blamed for the death, regardless if it was a Black Lives Matter person who caused it, right? Like who physically did it. It would have been the Nazis' fault. Because if the Nazis just wouldn't have shown up, right? Those darn Nazis showing up to peaceful protests to block people's freedom of speech and being able to protest peacefully. Hadn't been for those Nazis, right? That would have been what we would have heard from the news, right?
Yeah, it's weird. It's just
And then people say it's irresponsible of Trump to point out that the media has bias. I mean, it is obvious that the media has bias. Anyone that listens to it can point out where their biases are. Um, and it's just, it's just, it's awful.
yeah. To be honest, it's uh, the the weird hard right is just as strange to me as sorry, the hard left is just as strange to me as like the alt right. So it's like why 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 are you? I mean, I get the idea of safe spaces, and to be honest, I think there should be some safe places, but not everywhere should be a safe place, safe
Well,
space.
oh, safe spaces. Really? Ah,
Okay, okay. You need a safe space if it's your therapist's office. Okay,
okay, okay,
you need
okay.
you
I
need
can give you that.
you need a safe space if it's supposed to be a, let's say you're having a company retreat and you're just supposed to be talking about the company and what you can do for the company. Don't start talking about anything that's going to start riling people up. Okay?
Oh, okay. All
Either
right.
side.
That's fine for safe spaces, but I'm talking like when you say safe space, what comes to my head is like evergreen.
What is
And
that?
you didn't. Oh my. So
What?
all these things on college campuses with safe spaces
Oh,
where blacks and minority groups are like, this is a safe space, and they just throw any speaker or anyone that has a dissenting opinion, just off the campus, or they
that's
protest and cause massive amounts of damage. And I mean, this is how bad it's got, right? Evergreen is the example. It's gone too far, right?
mm-hmm.
So they have this like day, what is it? Um, Day of absence, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is a day that what used to be a day where blacks students didn't show up onto the college campus, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that the college campus would note their absence and what blacks contribute. It's kind of like a form of protest, right?
Right.
Well, this last year, 2017, the day of absence was supposed to be everyone who was not black or a person of color needed to get off the campus. Not voluntarily, no, forcibly eject off the campus so the campus is a safe place for people of minority. And a professor who, no, was in the civil rights movement, like,
Mm-hmm.
did all of that, right? Fought for black rights, right?
Mm-hmm.
He was white and he refused to leave the campus. He's like, you're not going to stop me from doing work and doing what I'm supposed to do. Right? That's not how this works. And they literally shut down the campus in protest after that words. They held the dean of the school hostage, right? Over a professor refusing to leave the campus for that day and showing up to work because he
That's
violated their safe space.
that's weird.
Yeah, and this is where progressives are going, right? Like you see this and you're like, I'm just like, okay, this is the breaking point. This is where it broke for me. Like when it gets to the point where people can't just state simple things without it blowing up to the point of ruining people's lives. Like this professor got fired because he showed up to work. This is basically what happened. He eventually he lost his job over it.
That's just that's just kind of weird and
And
fucked up.
it makes you think. It's like, Okay, well, we've gone full authoritarian, full authoritarian on the left, the far left, and full authoritarian on the far right. It's just your particular flavor of authoritarian that you want. Do you want fascist authoritarianism, or do you want, communist authoritarianism? And just so we can make the historical record clear, um, both forms get you tens or hundreds of millions of people dead. So the outcome is still going to be everyone dies. Just, how you want everyone to die is the question.
Yeah. That's weird.
It's awful. And it's like, yeah, this is where we are at in our society. Is we have progressive leftists who want communism and socialism and to get rid of all dissenters, because dissenters can't be allowed because they hurt our feelings and disrupt our safe spaces. And then you have the alt-right, which is at least a little bit more honest about their intentions, which is we want a white ethno-state. And everyone who isn't white can get out, even though we can't define what white is. Don't ask us to define what white is, because we don't know what it is. But if you're not white, get out. Oh, our society is just so messed up. And this is one of the reasons why I am no longer going to identify as a libertarian. I'm just going to identify as a liberalist, because at this point, I mean, libertarians are anti-state at this point. They've gone down the rabbit hole too. Like, you have the right and the left, there's their rabbit holes, and the libertarians have gone down their rabbit hole, which is anarchy.
Yeah.
Which anarchy is not a viable solution to totalitarianism. Okay, just no. We need a state. States are good things. They're not evil. So I can't be a libertarian anymore because I believe in a state. Obviously, that makes you anti-libertarian at this point. And I can't support totalitarianism because I have liberal values. Like, I need free speech. That's a non-starter for me. At least the libertarians, have that free speech in there. You just have to, carry around a shotgun so that if someone disagrees with your speech, they can't kill you over it. Right?
Yeah.
But no, so I'm a liberalist now. That's just officially what I'll have to be, because that's the only political group that meets with me on my political principles that I won't compromise, that just are a non-starter. And so, we talked about healthcare before. You mentioned that, and you said you were willing to compromise on market solutions. Well, at this point, I am willing to compromise on healthcare. I'd be okay with a universal health system and Medicaid for all at this point. I am willing to give that if we can, keep free speech around. But I would need to think that it's universal. It couldn't be just certain people.
Right.
Otherwise, I wouldn't be behind it. But no, no. At this point, there are more important things at stake in our society than just universal health care. Um,
You can see that.
that's now what I consider a first world problem. Um, Debating universal health care. We have more important things to debate. Let's prevent another, um, Nazi Germany from happening and another, communist Russia from happening. We don't need those sort of things in our world. They are not good things.
Yeah. Yeah, they are not.
I mean, that's just. I mean, it's sad that it's gotten to this point where people have to say, no, this is not a good thing, and we're the minority saying that this is not a good thing to do.
Mm.
And everyone else is either, well, they're denouncing Nazism at least. I mean, we all know that a white ethno state is not something we want.
Right.
That's a good thing, but um, got too many people that are like, all for Stalinist Russia, and the idea. This is just going to
Mm-hmm.
this because I know people are going to say this. Well, we haven't had communism, like real communism. Um, no, no, there's just we've had enough time to run the experiment with communism. Okay, it ends
Oh,
badly.
real communism doesn't work because there's never going to be a
Well,
group
it's
of people who get into government that aren't there for personal power.
exactly. And so when you say, well, my communism would work, it's just your personal brand of mass murder.
It you are eventually going to get, even if you start with the best intentions, you are eventually going to get subverted by someone who does not have the best intentions. There's going to be a Stalin to your Lenin, and there are going to be bad consequences.
I mean, it's always going to end. And even Lenin, it wasn't like Lenin was scot free on far as, mass murder. Oh, I mean, that's the thing is it's like, even with the best of intentions, we've done the experiment. Communism will end in awfulness. And rebranding it as something that's your personal take on it isn't going to make it any better. Um, but at the same time, I can see where um, people are, and even on free markets, I've come to the conclusion that
Mm-hmm.
free markets are not the ideal.
Mm-hmm.
It's the best of what we have right now as available
Right.
systems go. I mean, if you look at available systems, you have communism,
Mm-hmm.
feudalism,
Mm-hmm.
and like capitalism. And these are your three options in various forms, right? We've done feudalism enough to know that it sucks.
Yeah.
And communism is awful too. We see how that works. That's awful. Capitalism seems to have brought the most prosperity to the most number of people. So far, it's the best option. But it doesn't lead to, you know, the best possible outcome as far as what we want for an ideal.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think there's definitely room to I think economists. I mean, I studied economics at university, and I mean, what I was taught was basically here's how markets work. It
Hmm.
was a it was a really soft science. It wasn't really designed to teach you any
Hmm.
sort of research skills or postulating new ideas. It was just here's how they work. Here's how you can predict things. It was the mechanics of it.
Hmm.
And um which is all great and fine if you want capitalism, right? Like knowing how it works is awesome. To
Right.
manage it, right? But I think we need to think, I think we can, as human beings, think of a better way of running things. Um, there has to be a better way of doing things. Now, and everyone who says, well, this is the best we're going to get because you have it works off human greed and stuff. It's true, it's the best that we have, but it doesn't mean that it is the best or that we should stop looking for something
Hmm.
better. Um, you know, because if we did that, I mean, if you stop looking, right, you don't progress. You stay stagnant with what you have and it becomes corrupt, which is what we
Hmm.
have now. We have capitalism that's corrupt because we didn't move it forward. We didn't keep pushing and inventing new ideas for our economies. We can come up with something better. I mean, we have to come up with something better. We need something that pushes, right? There has to be something that's better. Because the issue, the main issues with the various, the main issue with capitalism is that the longer you run a capitalist system, the more wealth gets distributed unequally, right?
Yeah.
But it pushes invention. For progress of the society and making new things and better things, there's nothing better than capitalism. Like you want to turn it up to the 10th degree and get that, put the pedal to the metal for making new things that are better. Capitalism's your market of choice, right? Um, Communism actually levels out wealth fairly
Yeah.
well. I mean, it really levels the playing field. The issue is that it stagnates progress of new ideas. Like it just kills it. And just like capitalism makes a huge wealth gap, communism kills progress. You're not making anything new in
Yeah.
communism.
Yeah. And there has to be some way to balance
The
the
two.
desire for progress against the desire for both a stable state and the desire for equality. Because I mean, you can have progress and equality if you have a benevolent dictatorship. It's just you don't have a stable state. Because once your benevolent dictator is dead, you're probably going to end up with a non-benevolent dictator.
Exactly. And then your whole system falls apart.
Right, and that's ultimately the problem with Plato's Republic is that sure you can have philosopher kings, but you're eventually going to end up
Get a
with
tyrant.
people, yeah, and people who learn how to cheat the system just to get more power and can make themselves appear like philosopher kings, but end up just being tyrants.
Mhm. Which is interesting with Plato's Republic, how it goes. That you have tyrant, you have the best system, which are
Mm-hmm.
philosopher kings, which brings out the best amount of outcome, but turns into the worst. Like when it falls to the very bottom. And then you have the aristocracy that turns into an oligarchy, and funny, the republic that turns into a democracy. And democracy isn't an awesome thing for
Mm-hmm.
Plato. Democracies are bad. We like republics. Republics are good, and I think, and that's why. that's another thing with our political parties. They all want to push democracy, and it's like we don't want a democracy. The founding fathers didn't want a democracy. No one in their right mind wants a democracy. So stop saying it's democracy. It's not. It's a republic. We want something that protects minorities, right? From mob rule. Just from whoever has the most votes from doing whatever they want to the lesser party. Like that was something I like about the liberalists on their principles. They're constitutional democracies, which basically translates into a republic where it is set out in the foundations of the government that there are rights that the democracy, right, that the people can't override for other people, for minorities, right? It's like that's super important, and that was actually, and I mean, the liberalist ideas are still coming together, still coalescing into an articulated form. And so it started off that, they were talking, the main people who were forming this were talking, and they were like, oh, democracies are great. And it started off with just, we want democracy for everyone. And then it kind of coalesced as they thought about it, and as more people kind of influenced it, like, no, we don't want just pure democracy. We need to articulate that better. And they're articulated as a constitutional democracy, which is great because we have those basic rights that are now defended, like free speech.
Right.
It's important for not have a just straight democracy, so that we can have rights. That's an important thing, because otherwise the public can just override the rights of the minorities. Bad things happen. It starts off great, but ends horribly. But I think the American public now aren't aware enough to know that we don't want democracy. I think our republic is actually deteriorating, as Plato says. All forms of government eventually deteriorate, and I think we're seeing this, right? I think we're living in this deterioration where our republic is deteriorating into a democracy. I don't know if you've heard this, but there's a motion that's being pushed for just the popular states have signed on to this, that they will no longer issue their electoral votes based off of the votes in their individual state. It would be based off of the national popular vote. That way, that the president is whoever gets the most votes in the country, nationwide, regardless of what the individual states people say who they want for president. And this is basically, I mean, I hate how the Electoral College has changed, in particular, since all these states have made laws that you have to vote, that electorals have to vote based off of the votes of their state. That wasn't the purpose of the electorals.
Right.
The purpose was to create a step from democracy for the president. I mean, and if you look at it, since states have started putting these laws in that the electorals have to be faithful or it's a crime, right? Since that has started, our presidents have become more and more dogmatic to party lines. And so we're losing our great political thinkers as leaders, because they can't survive in the climate that our country has become in. Because because the electorals. The electoral's job was to make the decision for the groups. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm to look at the data. If I was elected as electoral, the electoral's job, or at least what it was to sit there, look at the candidates, and say, research their positions and what their ideals and their principles are,
Mm-hmm.
and then pick one based off of who you thought was best for the country.
Well, yeah, and that's the core of representative democracy instead of direct democracy, is that you elect an intermediary to effectively do politics for you as a full-time job, and then that intermediary does the work for you so that you don't have to do all the work of politics, of learning all the positions that candidates have and making sure that your views align with all of the rest of the views of the candidate that you're voting for. And I think that the more direct a democracy becomes, the shorter talking points become, and the more simplified the political process has to become, because everybody is expecting to have their voice respected, even if they don't do their research.
And the birth of the soundbite happens.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, is you can't know what. There are some of us responsible citizens who take politics seriously and do the legwork that we have to do to be an active participant in politics at this point.
Mm-hmm. And there's, in the current climate, there's so much uproar about fake news on
Everywhere.
Yeah, everywhere, on Facebook, on social media. It's just, except that fake news, I found, is actually pretty easy to spot. If it's something that would either affirm your beliefs too much, or it's something that directly sets you against somebody else, it's probably fake news. Like,
yeah.
It's either inflammatory rhetoric from somebody who's taking something out of context to be like, oh, the other side is terrible, or it's somebody who's taking something out of context to be, our side is great. And you look at how the Russians did all of, bought political advertising space and started Facebook groups. That's literally all they were doing, was creating things that affirmed that one side is good, and then affirmed the other side is good, and then pitted them against each other. It's like the real world is not shades of black and white. It's shades of gray.
Mm-hmm. And even that, it's they've already basically proven that Russia had no real effect on the election. I read the CIA reports, right, on it. That was so useful, having a professor that used to work as a CIA analyst, right? Because part of what she did was she had us read CIA documents and taught us how to read those, which was way cool. And yes, at first the initial investigation had shown that it was possible that there had been some that they definitely gotten involved in the election process, right? There's no question on that. But there was question on how much effect there was. And the thing is that they were playing both sides.
Yeah, they were not actively trying to support Trump as much as I think
just
Democrats want to believe that Trump was colluding with the Russians. I think that Russian collusion would be much more obvious because they were basically deliberately inciting partisanship rather than trying to help any specific
that's what the CIA report basically
groups.
said was they were creating a climate. Okay, you want to know what the Russians are responsible for? The Russians are responsible for where our country is right now, political climate wise, where no one will talk with anyone. That's the most effect that they had. It wasn't that they were pro Trump or pro Hillary. No, they were just trying to make it so that we can't do anything and we can't get anything done. I mean, they don't care who the president is as long as the president can't get any sort of political power to upset Russia or to effectively counter any of their interests. It's just the idea that they were, and I mean, let's face it, the whole FBI investigation has gone from collusion to who we can nail with lying to the FBI. That's basically where we are at. And so really, we do need to push for, compromises between the political parties. If you want to be against this whole Russian thing, right? Truly, if you want to be against the Russian thing, you should be supporting more talks between the parties and coming closer together rather than all this rhetoric of that's pulling our country apart, because that was the purpose of the Russians. The Russians are just trying to pull our country apart. And we're playing right into their hands. Like they succeeded. It was their involvement in the election process was a stellar success. Because we're playing out exactly what they wanted, which was so much political partisanship that nothing can get done.
Yeah. Our government is, besides shutdowns, headed straight to shutdown, not because of they can't agree to keep funding going. It's headed to a shutdown because eventually we won't be able to agree with each other on anything, and we'll end up just having people voting for their political parties and each political party taking a turn, and 90% of what they do is just undo what the last administration did. And there won't be any moving forwards.
Exactly. And then downfall United States. And really this talk of he's not my president is just, I mean, might as well be doing the Russians' job for them. And I mean, that's why it's just so disgusting. We need more compromise, and that's for sure. We need political parties to set down their principles as a party. I mean, and I think this would get us away from a two-party system. If you had a political party that say, "Hey, we're going to lay down core principles, not talking points, not what we want, right, for this election cycle, but core principles that will not change as our party." Like
Or
things
at
that
least won't change for the next 20 years.
no, not change for the next generation.
Yeah.
These have to be core principles, right?
Mm.
I mean, just like in psychology, I mean, people have core aspects of their personality that if those change, it's a major psychological forming event for a person. It's like a total breakdown of their psyche almost. If one of their core principles are changed in a violent manner over a short period of time. I mean, that's what we have to lay down in these political parties and these political movements. What is your core that isn't going to change, right? That if it was
Mm-hmm.
to change, you would cease to be this political party. And then the American people can say, okay, here's these core set of beliefs. Do they match up with mine? You
Right.
know, right? And if you can check off your core beliefs versus their core beliefs, then everything else is negotiable. And from that point, from those 2 points, right? If every political, first of all, I think we end up with like 6 or 7 political parties at that point, right? And they know where to compromise with each other, where they can form coalitions,
Mm-hmm.
and you know maybe Party A can agree with Party B on 3 out of 7 of core principles, right? And so on those 3 principles that they agree on, um, they can work towards um, creating policy.
Yep. Yep. Which is entirely what politics is supposed to be about. It's creating policy.
Yeah, and it's about, but you can't create policy until you know where your core is, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have this core, and then you can build out from there. What American politics lacks is a core. The Republicans don't have it. The Democrats don't have it. The first party that gets a core, like gets that core set of principles down and solid, right, is going to be able to resonate with the American people, like truly resonate with the American people. And I think that's what the political parties are trying to do. They're just trying to get people to vote for them. And so they will say whatever to get people to vote for them.
Yeah.
And then there's no actual core principles, right? And so they have 800 things that they promise the American people and can't do anything on it because they can't compromise on any of those things because that's what they told the American people that they would do. And if they don't do it, then they get voted out. Whereas if you can come in and say, here are the things I stand for. I stand for free speech. I stand for merit-based systems where we don't discriminate based off of gender or anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
You judge based on the content of your character and your ability, right? Just pull straight from Martin Luther King, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not on the color of skin, not on your gender, nothing, right? Content of your character and your ability. And, say that, I suppose, say a secular society, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that any religion should have control over our government, and that people should just be allowed to do, what they want to do with their lives, right? Be able to do something, right? They have to be individually accountable, like they're responsible for themselves and their family, and they rise or fall based off of their skill. And that anyone can make it as long as they, have the skill and the work ethic, right? I think you have a core set of beliefs like that, and you say, and everything beyond that is negotiable, right? You want to talk about a border wall? We can talk about a border wall, getting that funded, right?
Mm-hmm.
You want to talk about letting the people who came in here illegally, become actual citizens? we can talk about that, right? Those are all negotiable points. These are not, however. And if your policy violates this in some way, right, so this core, then I'm not for it, and I'm going to vote against it. I mean, that would totally change politics in this country. Like it would be like, well, now the American people only have to look at 5 things or 6 things, right? Instead of looking at 800 million issues that face this country. It would make the public more, it would make it easier for the public to make educated decisions on politics.
Yep. Yep. And that's ultimately what we need more educated decisions.
Oh, and we can't do it right now because,
yeah,
I mean, how much work did I put into the last election cycle when Trump was voted in office? Well, beforehand, I had the primaries where I had 16 different candidates that I had to research. Then I have to cut through all their BS, right, that they give to the American public on individual policies that they support, what they say are their core beliefs, which really aren't. They're just talking points. So you have to go and dig through what they've done, what they support, right, to really find what their core beliefs are. And you have to do that with every single candidate, right? Because you're not going to completely agree with any candidate. So you got to find the one you agree with most. And it's just this huge mess. And it's hundreds of hours of research to make an educated decision. And then the sad thing is you spend all that time, and then 500 other people or 1,000 other people who are next in line haven't done anything besides watch CNN or Fox News to make their decision. And you're just like, why do I even try sometimes?
Yeah.
And
I think the ultimate threat is that eventually those of us who do want to try and do believe in our democracy and the American way of doing life will eventually get disheartened and just give up and just allow America to fall apart for lack of trying.
Yeah, and I think, this is one of the reasons why I created this channel, is there's a way for us to reach the American people, right?
Yeah.
And, we do the work. We have differing opinions. But we're willing to come together, talk about it, and try to find either some common ground or try to find a way that might be better than either one of our opinions, right? We have an actual dialogue that isn't just you spew rhetoric, I spew rhetoric, and then we go home, saying, well, I did really good on spewing that rhetoric. I didn't change any minds or anything, but or come up with anything better, but I defended my position really well. What does that accomplish? But yes, so in order to see more compromises in our politics, I think people are going to need to set down core values, core principles. And I even think a lot of people I disagree with are people who are activists who are just, going through the movements like progressives, which we've already talked about this. Really they go against my core political principles really hard based on their actions. But I don't know how many of them have actually sat down, thought, and came with core principles, core political principles, and aren't just kind of following, oh, this is what feels good and what feels right. Right? They haven't thought out their actions or their stances. And if they did, how many of them would change their position? I think that would be an interesting thought experiment. Well, because it would have to be a thought experiment, it couldn't force people to think about their positions. And I think a lot of them would change because you can't talk to them. I guess you can talk to them. They don't really listen. They just go on about how awful of a person you are and call you a Nazi, which means they lost the argument. But that doesn't matter. They're still out there doing their thing. But yeah, no, it's interesting because they can't talk their way through their. We disagree, and even though you identify more with the progressives than the social conservatives, even you can see the outcome.
Yeah.
You've thought about it. You're like, I'm not a social progressive, even though I might side with them more often than the social conservatives. But it still leads to an awful road, and I don't want to see them in power and control over everything. And it's because you've thought about it. It's like being a social progressive is not where I want to be because, that's not what my core beliefs are. And I think you have, I can respect your core beliefs, even though we disagree on markets, right? Even then, I don't think we disagree per se. I think we agree that there should be something. We should be looking for something better.
Yeah.
And that it's an acceptable kind of stopgap until we find something better.
Yeah. And I don't disbelieve in capitalism. I just believe in that capitalism requires some level of regulation.
Which, pretty much, unless you're a libertarian who doesn't even believe in a state to begin with, you believe in at least some sort of regulation. That's the thing, is we just probably disagree on the amount of regulation.
Yeah.
And it's not a matter of, and it's a matter of degree of regulation, not all regulation should be gotten rid of. Although I'm pretty lean on the regulation. It's pretty lean, and you're probably a lot more heavy-handed than I am. But we still say markets are the good short-term solution. Let's look for something better because we should always be looking for something better.
Yeah.
And we can discuss the nitty-gritty details, but we can agree that markets are the best thing until we find something better.
Yep.
And there, we agreed. Our core principles are the same. We can work on it and get the nitty-gritty details out. But we don't want to get rid of markets completely and destroy capitalism. And some progressives want the end of capitalism, right? We want communism, if we talk right down to it. Some of them want communism. And we can agree that's a bad thing, and we don't want that.
Yeah.
At our cores, we are capitalists until a better system is presented to us. And you have to make the point, and anyone who says they have a better system has to make a point. We'll think about it, right? And if we agree, then we'll try it. If we don't agree, we're just going to say, no, that's not better than capitalism. We're going to keep our free markets. And at that point, our core beliefs might diverge, right?
Yeah.
And then we can no longer work on that axiom, right? We could work on other ones like free speech. We could keep that alive and build policy to protect and enshrine free speech. But we wouldn't be able to work on markets anymore. We'd be fighting. But that's that's the point of politics is you have core things that you can't change,
Hmm.
but we have everything else we can talk about. Everything else and the details of our core principles can have compromises in them, right? Like
Yeah.
even free speech. Not all speech is free speech that can't be regulated. Obviously, actionable threats aren't
Right.
good, and speech that would cause imminent danger to the public, right? Like
Yes.
shouting fire in a crowded theater.
Yep.
Okay. But we still have a core thing in free speech. Like, just because we're willing to say, you shouldn't be allowed to say anything in any situation, doesn't mean that we're going to start, stripping people's ability to speak and think normally. It's
Yep.
just some common sense things, right? I
Hmm.
know it's one of the things. People said, "Oh, I want to go to Canada," right? Oh, Canada now has people looking at fines and stuff for not using proper pronouns for trans people or whatever someone identifies as, right?
Hmm.
And I mean, just on the principle that there are new genders being added every day,
Hmm.
how can you keep up with the pronouns? I mean, if there's a new one added next week, are we all going to get a mass? I mean, is everyone in Canada getting a new mass text? The government's officially are recognizing this new pronoun for these type of people. Don't mess up. You have been warned,
Yeah. To be
right?
honest, I have no idea how that would work.
Uh, But it's law. Like it's actual law in
Hmm.
Canada now. Like it's not. Oh well, let's think about this. How would this work? It's for some people in this world that is in reality. That is not a thought experiment or we're thinking about this. It is this is my life.
Hmm.
And they could get brought down with a hate crime. Or the comedian, English comedian over in the UK, who's got taught his dog to do the
Oh yeah, that guy.
raises in. Yeah, that guy. He's been in a court case as a hate crime for teaching a dog a joke. Like it's obviously a joke. Probably a joke in poor taste, right?
I'm gonna say clearly a joke in poor taste, but still.
Clearly a joke in poor taste, but a joke, right?
Yeah.
And he's getting tried for a hate crime. He's looking at prison time for a joke. I mean, that is a reality. Like, this isn't like fun to think about. It's real life for people. And um,
Hmm.
so, I mean, to say, well, I mean, hate speech laws are great and we should have them in this country because there are people in the United States that want hate speech laws, right? They want those laws from other countries into our country,
Yeah.
right? Let's take a look at this great one. So if you're a feminist, the what was that video? The killing they kill these chicks kill a guy and then like look up his blood and stuff after he's dead, and it was kill all men, right?
I have
It,
no idea what you're talking about, man.
there's a video. I'll have to find it. I'll put a link to it in the description. But no, seriously, if hate speech laws got into effect, right?
Hmm.
Uh, they wouldn't obviously affect, wouldn't be for men, right? Because men have the power, therefore they can't be discriminated against, whatever, right? But that's clearly a violation. Like you're particularly,
Mhm.
I mean, it was a joke, right? Feminists pulled it on and said, oh, it's just a joke, right? But if the laws were written in such a way, right, and were enforced that any gender discrimination could be tried as hate speech, right? If you were
Mhm.
promoting hate or advocating violence, right, against a group, based off of how the UK is handling their hate speech laws, that would be a criminal offense. Like, there's a court case going on for someone who did something similar, just with Jews instead of men.
Mhm.
Okay?
Yeah.
That's what you're advocating for. Like, you've fallen into this hate speech crime category, yet you're advocating for it. Like, think about what you're advocating for. I mean, these people say, well, we're not trying to stop jokes. Like, we're not trying to regulate humor and jokes and comedy and stuff. We just don't want hateful speech to be in our society, right? But it starts off with saying that. Where's the
Yeah.
line? Who determines what is hate speech and what is a joke? Okay. And then they have biases, whoever's doing the deciding. So some group is getting discriminated against. Um,
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like we have impartial people that can determine this stuff. And
Yeah.
everyone has biases. And so it's just a horrible idea. If you think about it, it's a horrible idea. We don't want it in this country. We don't. I mean, Americans like to be able to say rude, awful things all the time. We love it. I mean, just look how the world sees us. We're foul mouthed people that no one likes. But darn it, we at least have the right to be foul mouthed. We're going to use our right. And if you
Mhm.
don't want that right, good for you. But don't be knocking on it, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, there's this huge push for censorship.
Yeah.
And if you can't speak, you can't compromise. And if you can't speak, you can't think. Um, and it just goes back to 1984, I guess. Or Orwell was great at seeing a potential future. And I think people miss it. I mean, the big thing is Big Brother, but that everyone notices. But the language, the newspeak, right?
Mhm.
That he describes in the book is way more terrifying to me than Big Brother. Like Big Brother monitoring everything, sure, that's
Mhm.
awful, right? But you can monitor what I want to do. That's fine. It's invasive of my privacy, and I don't like it, and I would go against it at every step I could. But what's more terrifying is forcing people to speak and just removing words from language.
Mhm.
Um, and that controls how people think. I mean, we know about this. You just studying the philosophy of language. Just
Yeah.
Germans. I mean, people who are native German speakers think differently than English speakers
Mhm. Yeah.
because of the language. Has nothing to do with that they're different human beings. No, they're still human beings. It's the language that you base your thoughts around.
Yeah. And there's been repeated research that shows that people who learn multiple languages think differently than people who only think in one language, people who only know one language.
Yeah, and that's because languages are useful. It's like um, we've discussed and bringing some sci-fi in here is we can't really think about time travel, not in any sort of meaningful way because our language doesn't
Mhm.
support it. I mean, to really think about time travel, we'd have to invent new words just to
Yeah.
be able to discuss it.
Yeah. You need so many different verb tenses that, I mean,
At that point, it's a new language.
yeah.
I mean, really, even if we're speaking a language that someone who speaks English could recognize, it'd
Yeah.
still be a totally different language. And you would use verb tenses. They have no idea what an English speaker wouldn't have any idea what you're talking about. Like,
Yeah.
what? They would be like, I understand, your nouns here, but I'm not understanding the tense. Like, the grammar would be totally wonky.
Hmm.
Like, no,
Yeah.
that's totally fine. And I mean, there'd be some level of communication between the two languages, but it would just break down once you started talking outside of linear time. It would be incomprehensible.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, if you're going to regulate language, is regulating language is the same thing as regulating thought. There is no difference. Once you bring it down to the really fine, you know, thought about it. Right? Like when you really think about it, and research shows, right? Science has even confirmed this. There's no difference. You start regulating speech and censoring it, you're censoring thought.
Yep.
Unfortunately, you just can't look into people's brains to charge them with a crime, you know, when they think something that goes against your speech laws. But
Yeah.
eventually those
But
words and ideas just filter once you have enough time in a censored society, you don't even need the censorship anymore because it's erased from even being able to be thought about.
yeah. Yeah. Well, it's been like 2.5 hours.
Yeah, so I think we've
I think we've pretty much hit everything
yeah.
for now, at
So,
least. So,
well, nice chatting.
yep. Yep. Good chat.
Good chat. Hope people enjoyed it and find it informative, and maybe take some action on it. And demand from their politicians maybe some core beliefs to really talk about things, and so that
Yep.
we can get some compromises going.
And think about your own core beliefs.
Exactly. Well, have a good night, and thank you for everyone for listening.
Yep. Thanks, everybody. Bye.